All right, ready to dive into something kind of mind-blowing? We're tackling hypercolonialism today.
Hypercolonialism, you say? That's not a term you hear every day.
You got that right. It sounds like we're about to enter some dystopian sci-fi movie, huh?
A little bit, yeah.
But this is the real deal, according to philosopher Bifo Berardi, and it's happening right now, intertwined with our digital lives.
If you think back to that classic image of colonialism, it's all about countries fighting over spices and rubber and land.
Oh yeah, the good old age of exploration narrative we all got in school.
Exactly. It's practically burned into our history books. But Berardi, he wants us to see those stories not just as isolated events, but as part of a bigger system.
A system that's still around in some form today.
You got it.
So where does hypercolonialism fit in? Is this like colonialism 2.0?
In a way, you could say that, but instead of physical resources, this new colonialism, it's after something else we all have our attention.
Hold on, are you saying my scrolling through social media is a form of being colonized?
That's exactly what Berardi argues. Think about it. Every notification you get, every ad that seems eerily specific to you, they're all designed to keep you hooked, to turn your attention into profit for someone else.
I never thought of it that way. So you're saying those targeted ads are like the new spices and our minds are the uncharted territories up for grabs?
You hit the nail on the head, and just like old school colonialism was driven by profit, so is hypercolonialism.
So who are these colonizers in this scenario then? Is it those big tech giants and social media platforms?
Absolutely. Berardi argues a small elite group, mostly in the global north, they control these platforms and get rich by turning our attention and our data into something they can sell. But to really understand how this works, we got to look at the foundation it's built on. Good old-fashioned historical colonialism.
Okay, rewind for a second. I'm remembering back in school learning about the East India Company and their relentless pursuit of resources in the East. Does that tie in here?
Oh, the East India Company is a perfect example of how historical colonialism and capitalism go hand in hand. They weren't just exploring for the fun of it, they were driven by profit, exploiting resources and people for a select few.
I'm guessing the human cost of that was pretty huge, even back then.
You have no idea. The source material specifically mentions King Leopold II of Belgium, and his rule over the Congo was brutal, to say the least. To meet the demand for rubber, his regime, they did awful things. Mass mutilations, killings, you name it.
That's absolutely horrifying. It's hard to believe something that barbaric could happen.
And that's a key part of Berardi's point. These weren't just unfortunate side effects of a different time. These were deliberate acts of violence, often erased or minimized in how we remember history, that paved the way for the exploitative systems we see today.
It's like those in power figured out how to exploit entire populations centuries ago, and now with the digital age, those tactics have just been, I don't know, upgraded and scaled up for the 21st century.
Now you're getting it. Instead of armies and colonies, today's tools are algorithms and platforms.
So there's a direct line from something like the Congo under King Leopold II to how we use our smartphones.
That's what we're going to unpack. The methods have changed, but the goal is the same: to extract value and profit off of those with less power. And that, my friend, is where our deep dive into hypercolonialism really begins.
So we're drawing a line from historical colonialism to today. But what's that look like? How does this whole hypercolonialism thing actually show up in our daily lives?
Well, think about how those digital platforms, how they're marketed, especially to people in the global south. Access to global markets, they say, be your own boss, escape that economic hardship. It's a tempting image, right?
Yeah, it's that whole side hustle thing. Everyone's trying to be an entrepreneur, build a brand, become an influencer.
You got it. But we forget sometimes the structure of these platforms, it often benefits the ones already in control.
Good point. It's easy to focus on those individual success stories and not see the larger system.
And that system, that's what Berardi says, often mirrors the power dynamics we saw in historical colonialism. Small group in the global north, they design and control the platforms. Meanwhile, you have this huge workforce in the global south, often invisible, dealing with the consequences.
So instead of physical labor, like in the past, now it's our digital labor that's being exploited.
That's the core of Berardi's argument. And this is where he brings up the mechanical Turk worker.
Mechanical Turk. That rings a bell. I think we talked about that, didn't we, in that episode about AI?
We might have. It's an interesting idea, long history too. It comes from that chess-playing machine back in the 18th century, marketed as this marvel of artificial intelligence. But, twist, there was a human chess master inside controlling every move.
A human behind the curtain. I remember that now.
And that's Berardi's point. It's happening again in the digital age, but on a way bigger scale.
Yeah.
Millions of people, often in developing countries, they're doing these invisible micro tasks that keep the whole digital world running.
Okay, like what kind of microtask?
Think about anything online that seems automated. Used a website's chat support lately, filled out one of those online surveys. Good chance on the other end of that was a real person, often in a developing country, doing that microtask for almost nothing.
The ghost workers of the internet, huh? Never really thought of it that way.
And because that work, it's outsourced, different countries, it's hard for those workers to organize, fight for better conditions.
That's got to be isolating, stuck in the system, competing with each other for scraps.
And the source material, it goes even darker, talking about content moderators. You ever see that documentary, The Cleaners?
I haven't seen it, but I've heard. Pretty intense, right?
Oh, it is. Shows the experiences of these digital workers, many in the Philippines. Their job is to go through the worst of the internet, violent stuff, hate speech, so we don't have to.
So next time I see some cute puppies on my feed, I should be thanking some underpaid worker who spared me from something awful.
Yeah, kind of a messed up irony. They're keeping the internet sanitized, friendly for us, but their own well-being doesn't seem to matter as much.
It's bleak, honestly. Is there any way out of this hypercolonial system? Or are we all just stuck?
Berardi doesn't think we're powerless. He says we need collective desertion.
Desertion. We're just going to abandon the internet.
Not entirely, but we need to change how we relate to it,
Yeah.
Mass disengagement from the system, build something new, fairer, sustainable.
Sounds great in theory, but how do we even start to dismantle something this big?
It's a huge task, I won't lie, but Berardi says it starts with awareness. We got to be critical, question those promises these platforms make.
Yeah.
Who's benefiting from us being online all the time, chasing that digital dopamine?
So be mindful of how we spend our time online, who we're interacting with, what we're consuming.
Exactly. And support those alternative models, platforms that actually care about ethical labor, data privacy, real human connection, not just profit and endless growth.
We need a digital detox, both personally and as a society. Not just logging off for a weekend, but really changing our relationship with technology.
That's the challenge, and it goes way beyond just the digital world, Hypercolonialism, this isn't just some abstract idea. It has real consequences.
Real consequences, huh?
Yeah.
The source material uses some strong language here, talking about like infamous wars at borders and everything. Intense stuff.
Yeah, it is intense, and for good reason. This isn't some, far-off dystopia. This is right now we're talking about.
Okay, so break it down for me. How does hypercolonialism, something happening in the digital world, lead to actual conflict like that?
Remember those seductive ads we were talking about? How these platforms, they make it seem like a better life is just a click away, especially for people in the global south dealing with poverty or climate change.
Right, that whole escape your circumstances thing.
Exactly. They're seeing these perfect images, these success stories, all amplified by algorithms, and it creates this pull, this belief that the global north, that's where their dreams can come true.
So they're drawn in, hoping for a better future, but
But what happens when they get there? Are they welcomed with open arms? I don't think so.
sadly, no.
More often than not, it's suspicion, hostility, all that xenophobia. The same system that was profiting off their digital labor, now it turns its back on them in the real world.
Brutal. And this is where the source material says things get really dangerous.
Right, because this wave of people, often they're desperate, they're disillusioned, it plays into those existing fears and prejudices, right?
Right.
Creates that us versus them mentality that those in power, they love to exploit.
It's a vicious cycle then. Hypercolonialism pushes migration, which leads to more fear, more division, more conflict.
That's the danger Berardi's warning us about. And it goes beyond physical borders, too. This is happening online with hate speech, with algorithms that just make existing inequalities worse.
It's like we're on this train that's going way too fast, headed for a bad ending. Can we hit the brakes at all? Change course before it's too late?
Berardi thinks so. But it takes a big shift in thinking, what he calls collective desertion.
We touched on that before, but what does that look like practically? It's such a big idea.
It is big, and there's no easy answer. But he says, start by questioning. Who benefits from us always being connected, addicted to these platforms, always needing that next digital hit?
Taking back our attention, our control, right?
Exactly. Recognizing our choices have power, both individually and together. Every time we support a tech company that's actually ethical or choose tools that care about privacy or even just log off and connect with people in our communities, that's a step towards deserting this messed up system.
Being more conscious of what we're doing online, but also building those alternatives, changing what we value from just endless growth to sustainability, real connection.
You got it. And it might seem overwhelming, but even small acts of resistance, they can make a difference.
So for someone listening, feeling overwhelmed, where do they even begin? What's one thing they can do today?
Ask yourself, what's one small act of desertion I can do today? Maybe it's deleting a social media app, or actually talking to a friend about this stuff, or supporting an organization fighting for digital rights. It all adds up.
That's a powerful message. Leaves me feeling challenged, but hopeful too. This has been quite the deep dive. Definitely a lot to think about.
Glad to be here. And remember, awareness is the first step, and you're already taking that step by having these conversations.
And to everyone listening, we leave you with this: what will your act of desertion be? Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.